I would like to welcome all of you as well as Doctors Silver and Nick Woolf. Their presentation will take approximately 40 minutes. It will be divided into two sections, one by Dr. first Woolf and then Dr. Silver. And while they are presenting, feel free to write down your questions using the questions section in the control panel. And you can practice now. In fact, some of you are already doing that. Just say hello, and I will be able to read what you write there. So at the end of their presentations, I will go ahead and start reading those questions, and they will proceed to answer them. Your microphones will remain muted throughout the session, but I may unmute some of them, those of you who would like to ask questions. I would like now to give the microphone to my colleague, Yvette Maguat from IIQM, and she will give an introduction of the presenters. Yvette?
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Nicholas Woolf is a qualitative research consultant and teacher of ATLASti. He has taught graduate classes in qualitative methods, including at the University of Iowa, and since 1999 has taught approximately 300 ATLASti workshops throughout North America for several thousand students. He has conducted and consulted on dozens of research projects in widely diverse fields, from PhD dissertations to large-scale multinational studies. Nick gave the keynote address, Analytic Strategies and Analytic Tactics, at the 2013 ATLASti Users Conference in Berlin. His textbook, co-authored with Christina Silver, Qualitative Analysis Using ATLASti, the 5-level QDA model method, will be published by Routledge in 2017. We also have Christina Silver with us today. Christina is a qualitative researcher and teacher of qualitative software packages, including ATLASti. She manages the CAQ-DAS networking project based at the University of Surrey, UK. The project provides information, advice, training, and ongoing support in different software programs designed to facilitate qualitative and mixed method analysis. Christina also undertakes research, training, and consultancy via her consortium QDA Services and is co-author with Anne Lewins of Using Software in Qualitative Research, a Step-by-Step Guide. Christina has trained thousands of researchers and students to use qualitative software since 1998. Her textbook, co-authored with Nick Woolf, Qualitative Analysis Using ATLASti, the 5-level QDA method, will be published by Routledge in the summer 2017. Christina and Nicholas, it's great to have you both here with us today.
Thank you very much, Yvette. I will now give the microphone to Nick, as well as the control of the session. Just a second, Nick. Mm-hmm. You will see a message that will pop up. Click where it says Show Screen. All right, we can see your screen, so please go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody, wherever you may be. As Yvette said, I first introduced the idea of 5-level QDA method at the ATLASti Users Conference in 2013, and for the last 4 years have been working on this book, which was published last week. So the timing of this webinar is good. Christina and I have been working together on this, and we are going to introduce the principles and some of the practice to give you an idea about what this method is all about. I'll start by telling you where this came from. Christina and I have combined almost exactly 40 years since we've both been teaching ATLASti in workshops, Christina in the UK and myself in the United States. And over that time period, we've been observing how our students learn and don't learn how to become experts in using ATLASti. And the main principle that we figured out some time ago was that learning how to operate the software really well and us showing examples of our own projects as if, you know, the best way to use the software is not sufficient to lead to expertise that can transfer to other people's projects and methods. And so we looked into this, the challenges that people have in gaining expertise. We looked at our own practice with introspection and observed other people. And we realized several things. First of all, that many users of ATLASti use it in a very limited fashion. Often people use it for coding and retrieving data and leave it at that and then go off Atlas. Whereas they could be using it for all aspects of the project, but they tend to stop using it when it could be most helpful. This isn't devastating to qualitative research, but it's sad. But what's devastating is when people take the other approach of switching over completely to letting the software features and the capabilities of the software determine what they're going to do in their research. We therefore needed to address these challenges, and what we knew we needed was a method for harnessing ATLASti powerfully, which is really a technical term. Harnessing is in contrast to operating. So operating ATLASti is a very straightforward thing to do, but harnessing it to do good quality research is another thing. And powerfully just refers to using it throughout all aspects of a project. And we've developed a way of teaching it that transcends methodology and software, because we know we needed to go beyond teaching a particular methodology for using the program and get to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is that experts have learned unconsciously over a long series of projects how to harness the program powerfully. And our task was to unpack this black box. The first principle and the main thing is that strategies are different from tactics. This is something that I recognized very early on, that this is what I did when I was using Atlas, but I didn't know exactly what it meant. And it's taken these 3 or 4 years to exactly unpack what that means. Strategies are commonly felt to be just another word for tactics. Outside of the military domain, where they take strategies and tactics very seriously, people tend to think of these as almost similar terms. The example we use is from Alan Bryman's book. An alternative search strategy is to select a sample of journals and to search for articles. This tactic was employed. So it's like tactic is used as just a non-repetitious way of saying the same thing. But each of these strategies and tactics have their own very, very different domain. So strategies means what you plan to do. And the domain of the strategies are the methodology, the project objectives, the research question. This is what we learn in qualitative research classes and has nothing whatsoever to do with software or ATLASti. This is our general picture of what the strategies are. We have a purpose expressed as a research question. We choose a methodology. We develop analytic methods and data collection methods. The cloud graphic is meant to indicate that this is a very emergent organic process, but it comes down to something a little more tangible, an analytic plan, which leads to some specific analytic tasks to be accomplished. So this is the area of strategies. The area of tactics, how you plan to do this, is completely different and unrelated. And it used to be, we used highlighters, we used to cut up interview transcripts with scissors, we used whiteboards. Some people use general purpose software, and now a lot of us use computer-assisted dedicated programs like ATLASti. The second principle is that in our field of qualitative research, the strategies are not just different from the tactics, but they are contradictory. And this is what causes the issues. How is this contradiction going to be reconciled? Strategies on the left that I just described are to varying degrees iterative and emergent. Some of our work is more structured. Some of our work, the methodologies are more structured, content analysis, mixed methods research. Some of it's very emergent, interpretive method, phenomenology and various things, but it's to some degree iterative and some degree emergent. Otherwise, it becomes a statistical study. This means that the outcome of any specific analytic task isn't always predictable in what the next step of analysis will be. This is completely different and opposite in nature from what computer software is like, which is cut and dried, where the outcome of anything you do in software, selecting a menu item or clicking a button, is fully predictable in advance. The reason this contradiction is important because we have a very different mental mindset when thinking emergently and when thinking in a cut and dried fashion. So this contradiction has to be managed in some way. And many people avoid the contradiction altogether by not thinking about it too much and just thinking of the software and the qualitative methodology as something singular, just one thing they're doing. They're doing their analysis with ATLASti. And that's problematic. More problematic is another way of managing a contradiction, which is to compromise between the two very different things. Compromise is sometimes a good thing. In our relationships, we have to compromise with each other, but compromise can also be not such a healthy thing. The example I always use is in a marriage. If one partner is an alcoholic and we have to deal with that in some way, it's not very helpful for the other partner to take a compromise approach and say, well, why don't you drink in the mornings, but not in the afternoons? And that's, you know, a good enough solution. An example of a compromise that's not helpful. In this field of qualitative research, compromise is what we call 3-level QDA, as opposed to what we've developed as 5-level QDA. Here we see 3 things on the screen. The strategies on the left, which are expressed in terms of our methodology and that we've been talking about. On the far right are the tactics, what we do in the software, very cut and dried with those boxes. And it's felt that maybe a compromise would be to express the methodology in just a somewhat more standardized way than the methodology, so that it somehow fits the software in an easier way. It's like a standard methodology you can use in any project with Atlas. And the warning signs of knowing that you're being recommended to use a 3-level QDA process is anything where one size fits all, that this is how you do qualitative research with Atlas, whatever your methodology. And this is not what we mean by transcending methodology. This is not transcending the methodology. This is compromising between the strategies and the tactics. And there are some approaches in the 1980s and 90s which proposed thinking about qualitative research in this somewhat more standardized way to make it easier to use software. And this is one of the reasons that the software has not taken off as it should. What we do is we want to think about going beyond this contradiction. Transcending a contradiction means seeing the two contradictory things in a larger context so that the contradiction isn't problematic anymore. That's the general way that contradictions are dealt with. For us, transcending the contradictions means this is what experts have unconsciously learned to do over a succession of research projects. They unconsciously go back and forward between the emergent analytic strategies and the very cut and dried software tactics by what we call translating between them. Translating between strategies and tactics is the whole method of the 5-level QDA approach. And initially, if one wants to learn this fairly rapidly, rather than the many, many years of trial and error that experts typically have gone through, one has to start by making this a conscious process, which then fairly quickly becomes unconscious once you've got the hang of it, rather like learning a bicycle. So the 5-level QDA method is about making transparent, opening the black box of what this process is that long-term users have come to do. So the 5-level QDA method is basically about unpacking the unconscious process of translation between strategies and tactics. And this is a picture of the 5 levels, just to talk through it rather rapidly. On the left are the strategies, as we're a little bit familiar with already. Level 1 are the objectives and the research methodology and the research questions, very open-ended, emergently developed things, but which eventually come down to something a little more tangible in the green circle, which is a specific analytic plan to accomplish those objectives. And the plan generates specific analytic tasks to be accomplished. And in our 5-level method, analytic tasks are key. They have to be defined at an appropriate level of detail, not too detailed, but not too general, so that they can easily be accomplished well using the tactics of the software. So much of the book is about training one to develop analytic tasks that are helpful for this process. And that's irrespective of the kind of methodology. Whatever your methodology, from the most structured mixed method to the most emergent phenomenological approach, eventually has an analytic task to be accomplished. Level 3 is to translate the tasks in a way that they can be accomplished in the software. And the most introductory way of telling you what translation is, it's simply a process of transforming the strategies into the tactics. But as we get to actually do this, the definition and content of that becomes, of course, more specific. Once one's translated an analytic task, the outcome is a tool in the software. And we use the word tool very specifically, not just as a general purpose word for feature or capability of the software, which I'll describe in a moment what we mean by tool. But once we've translated an analytic task, sometimes this can be accomplished by what we call selecting a software tool that already exists as is in the software. And sometimes we have to construct a tool, which means putting together two or more of the existing tools that are in the software, or using them in an unusual way. But one way or another, we construct or select a tool, accomplish this very small analytic task, and there's a result or an outcome. And then that feeds back to the analytic plan. We take those results and we think again with the mindset of the strategies about what we've accomplished and what we want to do next in the terms and language of the methodology in the project. And then we get a new analytic task, and then we translate that into the software to produce tools for the next task. So that in a nutshell is the method. There are 5 principles, which is in a way a summary of what I've just been telling you. The first thing is that strategies and tactics have to be kept distinct very consciously. And this isn't the normal way of thinking about when we're using software for a particular purpose. Secondly, that in our case, qualitative research, the strategies, which are the analytic strategies of the project, and the tactics, which are in our case are operating the software, are contradictory by nature, and that we have to manage this contradiction. Avoiding the contradiction, which we call one-level QDA, just thinking of the software and the research as just a single thing, or compromising between them with 3-level QDA, a third, more standardized, one-size-fits-all way of going about doing qualitative research to make it match the software more easily, are both problematic ways to manage the contradiction. Instead, we have to transcend the contradiction by putting the strategies and tactics into a larger context, whereby the contradiction isn't a problem, and we just translate by going back and forward between them. And that once we've mastered the translation process, we'll discover that it's one way. That circular diagram I just showed you was a clockwise process. It's always driven by the analytic strategies. And that's really the topic that Christina will be dealing with in a few minutes. We never go the other way. We don't take the capabilities of the software and translate those into something we would like to do in the research. So translation begins with an analytic task and then moves to find a tool to accomplish it in the software. So these are the somewhat abstract principles behind the process. Now we have to learn how to actually do this. And obviously that's what the book is instructing. The first thing is that we take a very different approach to thinking about the software than is common because that's necessary to make this translation process conscious. And the main thing is that we don't deal with software features that are already presented and organized in the software. If I can give you an example, a code is one thing, but the auto coding feature is something quite different. A feature is a combination of taking an action on something in the software to fulfill a task. And software developers present software in terms of features because they're high level and they're easy to understand what's going to happen. But we can't translate our analytic tasks into features of the software. It's too high level. So what we do is that we identify the components of the computer software, which are like the things in the software. In ATLASti, we have 14 components. And they don't involve actions. They are things, like a document or a code, to which we apply actions in order to create a tool for ourselves. So the first thing in learning how to do this process is to have a much deeper understanding of the nature of software in terms of its components. Secondly, is what I've already alluded to, which is identifying analytic tasks for the translation process. And this is highly specific, what we mean by an analytic task. And I can't go into it in detail now, but it involves understanding how to construct a task at a certain level of detail that is appropriate for the translation process. Having done that, we do the translation. And what we are translating between are the units of the analytic task and a component of the software. This is not the usual way we think when we're going about using software. Usually we want to learn how to operate it and what its features are, and then find a way to use those features. We're proposing that is not how to use ATLASti powerfully in qualitative research. Qualitative researchers don't always think about their units as much as quantitative researchers do, but with us, we need to. And we spend a large amount of, large number of pages in the book teaching researchers, qualitative researchers, how to think about the units of their analytic tasks so they can be matched and represented by components of the software. The translation process itself has 5 steps to it. We've kind of laid these out so that they can be learned. The thing about these 5 steps is that they are not like step-by-step procedures that have to be followed one after the other at all times, but you have to start that way. They're very much like training wheels when you're learning to ride a bicycle. You have to have these very controlled ways of learning, but once you've done it a few times, you can discard the training wheels and you just know how to do it. So these 5 steps of translation that we've laid out are very spelled out processes, but once you've been through it a few times, the whole thing becomes a unitary activity and unconscious, and one has gained the expertise. Coming back to the diagram about translation, you'll see I've added at the top different mindsets or ways of thinking throughout these 3 processes. And this is really the skill of the qualitative researchers. This is a skill that experts just naturally have or they develop. They think differently when they're thinking about their analytic strategies than when they're thinking about what button to press in the software. So in the research side, we're using an emergent mindset. We're thinking emergently, which is a way of thinking. And then when we're using software, it's not very helpful to think like that. We think with an algorithmic mindset, meaning you do one thing and then the next thing automatically is guaranteed to occur. You press a button and you know what's going to have next. This is a very different mindset. And if you apply an algorithmic mindset to a qualitative research design or process, it it reduces the quality of the qualitative research. But in the middle is a different mindset altogether. And for the translation process, we use a heuristic mindset. We fall into a heuristic mindset, which means we have guidance, we have these steps of translations, but they don't have to be rigidly followed, and less rigidly. They're just guidelines which are approximate. And the skill of the qualitative researcher is to move among these three mindsets as they are moving from one task to another. And we lay out in the book, in an initial way, how to do that. My next book is going to be about how to move consciously among these mindsets to make qualitative research even higher quality than it is now. I'll leave it at that, having presented you with those principles and an overview of the process. And now I will hand over to Christina, who's going to give some practical examples about how not to let the software drive the process using this method.
Thank you, Nick. Now, Christina, you will see a message pop up on your screen. Just click Show My Screen.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
You can see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nick, for that. I'm now going to bring some of that abstract content that Nick's been through, hopefully to life by giving you a demonstration. And I'm going to focus firstly on what can happen when you let the tactics drive the strategies, and also the thinking process to go through when ensuring that strategies instead drive the tactics. And as I'm doing that, I'll also be illustrating that the same analytic task can indeed be accomplished using different tools within ATLASti. So part of the skill of harnessing software powerfully is realizing that there are many ways often to accomplish the same task. So thinking about how to choose the appropriate tools based on what is appropriate at that time in a particular project. So in order to address these 3 points, I'm going to use a literature review project. So I'll just start off by telling you very briefly some context about that project. The overall objectives of the research projects that this literature review was part of was to identify problematic areas in using software for qualitative data analysis. You'll be unsurprised that that's my main area of research, given my interests. And we were doing that at the CACDAS networking project that Yvette mentioned in her introduction at the University of Surrey in Guildford, because we wanted to develop relevant online support materials which were focused around the challenges that people were experiencing in using software after the initial training that they had. In terms of the literature review, which is what I'm focusing on here, we were focused around the question of how does the literature discuss the issues in teaching, learning and using qualitative software. And we were doing that by undertaking an in-depth literature review using an inductive thematic analysis approach, in contrast to other types of literature review, such as a systematic review. So just to give you a little bit of context about the tasks that I'm going to illustrate today in the broader plan, I'm going to focus on point 2, which is to narrow down the pool of literature. We had previously gathered seemingly interesting articles about this topic. So our task here really is to, or the phase of work that we're undertaking is to narrow that large pool of literature down in order to identify which articles were particularly relevant to our focus. You can see that there are several phases of work that happened after that, which I'm not going to be discussing today. What I am going to be showing you is looking at the tasks of familiarizing with the literature and organizing the literature according to relevance, which were the two specific tasks involved in narrowing down the pool. So let's think about tactics for familiarization, having outlined briefly the strategy side of things. In ATLASti, there are many tactics that we could employ to familiarize with the data. You may be familiar with some of them, and I'll show you some of these shortly. We could visualize frequently occurring words and count them, and we could auto code on the basis of that material that we find to capture potentially useful words and phrases. So if we were thinking about looking to the software for fulfilling our objective of narrowing down the pool of literature, we may decide to use these tools. So I'm just going to go into ATLASti now and just show you a very early version of this project, and you can see that I've got one full text PDF article open here, and on the left hand side I've actually got 84 PDF articles in this project at the moment. And of course, when I'm at this stage, I've gathered the literature files, these 84 in the first instance, and I haven't yet read them, but I want to familiarize with them. And you may be aware that there is the word cloud and the word list functions in ATLASti, which may be initially considered to be a really interesting way to visualize. I'll just show you a word cloud for all of those 84 documents, and you can see various individual words which may allow me to familiarize what's going on in these articles, maybe to focus my attention on what might be interesting. And I don't know how familiar everybody is with this feature, but holding my cursor over individual words gives me a count of that number of the number of times that word occurs across my 84 documents. I may also decide to do something similar, but in a list view, and see all of those words, and that may be something that I can export into Excel and order or sort those words into similar terms that may be interesting to look at in more detail. And if I was going to go through this process by focusing on these features, then I may end up deciding, well, okay, there's certain interesting words in the data that I want to auto code. And in ATLASti, you've got this wonderful auto coding tool whereby I can choose a particular word. So I'll just go back and have a look and find a word that I might be interested. Let's take the word techniques for now. So I can ask ATLASti, I can create a new code and just call it techniques, and then I can search for that word, and I can specify how much I want the software to auto code. I'll just leave it on paragraph for now. I'm going to do this quickly now, but if I had more time on my hands, I may confirm matches and look at each instance of that word in its context. And ATLASti is now looking across all of those 84 documents for me and coding every instance, every paragraph in that that it finds in those documents. So if I pick up that one and double click to retrieve those words, then you can see that I can very quickly find the instances of those words. Let me go to one where it's in the actual text, and you can see that I can look at those and select them and make the quotations that ATLASti is capturing. In fact, I might make that the whole of that passage, because the whole thing is about that particular word. And in that way, I could pretty quickly get lots of coding done based on the presence of keywords. And this is something that I've observed in many researchers who come to my workshops, who find this to be a really useful way of working with literature and undertaking a literature review. But it can be potentially problematic. The extreme example is I had somebody coming to a workshop a few months ago, actually, who had more than 600 PDF articles in her ATLASti project, and had read about how useful this kind of feature was for doing a literature review, but hadn't really found that it was helping her very much. And it was after I'd spoken to her for a few minutes or so that I realized that she'd never actually read any of the articles. She'd just gone through this auto-coding process and been very seduced by the word cloud and the ability to auto-code, and she'd let those features drive the way that she was thinking about using her software. That's a very extreme example, but illustrates how letting the capabilities of the software drive the way that you think about doing a piece of work. And of course, if we didn't have ATLASti, then we would be reading our literature files in the first instance and maybe making notes or comments. And one of the things, the other issue about this type of approach with undertaking a literature review with ATLASti is that somehow, unless you're being very systematic about the way that you're going about this, it can almost encourage you to be coding the data and reading chunks of data rather than the whole article in its entirety. Whereas really, if I want to go back and think about the purpose of the task, so I'm just going back to my PowerPoint presentation briefly, in order to come up with a more appropriate way of accomplishing this task, because just coding based on those words is not doing that for me, then I need to think about several things, and we call this the context of the analytic task. So going back to the purpose, in this example, it was to develop an overview of the content of the literature. And of course, I can do that by running the auto-coding that I've just shown you, but I'm doing that not just in the context of the large number of articles I've previously generated or previously identified, but because I want to identify the relevance of each piece of literature. And I want to do that in a standardized way so that I can be clear about which pieces are relevant for my particular focus and which pieces are not. So I need to think about what I'm going to do next in the project, as well as thinking about the purpose of why I'm undertaking this task in the first place. So in this example, I didn't want to read and analyze each piece of literature in detail in order to accomplish my purpose of developing an overview and identifying the relevance. I wanted to do it relatively quickly, but once I've done that, I need to read and analyze the pieces of literature that I've identified as relevant in more detail. So what I decided to do was to skim read each piece of literature and to make consistent notes as I was going along. And this is what I'll show you shortly in the software. But just to contextualize that decision a little bit more, skim reading and making structured, consistent notes about each piece of literature as I was doing so enables me to analyze my own structured notes later on as part of that process. And that then means that my initial readings during this task become available for me to build upon in the next task. So rather than quickly coding data according to what I can identify through auto-coding, I want to take a slightly more systematic approach, but also to enable me to continue with the project later on. So what I did was to develop a what I called a critical appraisal template, which you can see here in a later version of my project, where we together as a team, this was a team-based project actually, but we together thought about what it was that we were interested in identifying and thinking about in each article, and we created headings with some information in the brackets, as you can see, about the kind of information that we were looking for. So we're really focusing, we're planning how we're going to read the data, and we created a memo for each of the articles. Here I've got one, and you can see the sort of short notes that we made in the memos around each area. And you can see that I've got here written up in red here to remember to write in paragraphs, because we did want to do some auto-coding, but the auto-coding that we wanted to do later on was based on our reviews rather than directly on the literature files themselves. And because ATLASti can auto-code using the paragraph, as we saw earlier, that's one of the options. We wrote in paragraphs in order to enable that later on. So we actually undertook this project in version 7 of Atlas a few years ago. And in that version, we could do this writing in a document. At the moment in ATLASti, we can't edit documents, but we can turn our memos into documents in order to analyze them. So here you can see I've got a few of those appraisals listed as memos, and I can right click on one of those and I can convert that into a document. I'm not actually going to do that right now because I've done it already. So I'll now open up, here is the document version of that same memo, and you can now see on the right hand side that some coding has been done. So what we ended up doing is we kept the full text articles in the ATLASti project, but we created what we called a critical appraisal for each article, and as we were reading it we wrote in those, and then later on we decided that what we would do would be to analyze our reviews. So here you can see the initial stage of that process, and we created codes, which I've got here in capitals and colored, for the key areas of the review, and each of those was auto-coded using the auto-coding tool, and I'll just show you how to do that. I've done it on author role already, but I'll just do that again just in case some of you are not have not done this before. So I'll just create a new author role. I'm calling it XX so I can find it later and remove it, because of course I've done this already. But there's my new code, and this time I'm searching for the particular phrase that indicates the particular area of my structured review that I want to capture. I won't confirm always, I'll just run it quickly, and pretty quickly it will do that auto coding for me. And my new author role code is sitting there. It's got 14 paragraphs. That's it. That's because at this stage of the project that I'm showing you today, I've got 14 of those reviews. And if you look over here, there's the original author role code that I created, but here's the second one. But of course, we didn't just want to capture all of the author role information that we'd written. We wanted to capture whether it was either not clear what the author's role was, as in this example, or whether some of the authors were teachers of qualitative methods and software, or users of software. And you can see, if I go to a different document, you can see it more easily probably. If I go to this one, and bring my margin over. You can see that the author role here has got two codes, teacher and user, applied to them. So we can do that either, again, by auto coding, because we're using consistent ways of indicating whether they're teachers or users, or how I actually did it, just because I like working in the networks, was that I would open up that author role code that I've just created by auto coding and put it in a network. And then when I ask by right clicking to import the quotations, because of the way we've structured our notes, we can very quickly see who the teachers and the users, etc. are, and so you can organize that in here, and then you can recode, you can create new codes in here and do the coding in here. Let's just pretend that I can type. So that's how we did that, and if I show you the actual network, which is here, which has been used to do that process, you can see that we did that recoding to capture the author or user or unknown role. So that's one example of using coding to capture that information. But one of the other things that I wanted to talk about today is to illustrate that often when we go through this translation process from the strategies to the tactics, we realize that there are many different ways in which we can accomplish a task. And some of you who are familiar with ATLASti may be wondering why I didn't use document groups for this process. So I just want to show you that actually in this project we did both the coding process and we also organized our documents into document groups according to the information that we'd coded. So here, for example, I've got a group of all of the reviews that in this initial phase we've found out that the authors are teachers. Here are the users, and this one is a smart group which combines the teacher and users. So we'll put together those where that we've indicated are teachers as well as users. And the reason that we did both, that we used both coding and grouping, so using two tactics to accomplish a task, is because that enables us to do various things later on. This grouping of documents enables us to focus our attention at a later stage when we've done our more in-depth analysis of the highly relevant or potentially relevant articles. So we've also done a very similar process that I've just demonstrated with author role. We also did that with the relevance and initial assessment area, and these groups allow us to focus attention just on the potentially or highly relevant pieces of literature that have been written by teachers as opposed to users. But having the codes also do that work for us gives us an alternative lever to interrogate our data. So I'm just going to finish up by showing you what I mean by that, by just quickly running a co-occurrence table. So let's imagine that we're interested in learning issues, teaching issues, and using issues, which are three of the key areas of our reviews. And let's say that we're interested in finding out where they are talking about nothing specific is not so interesting, where there's lots of content in the article about learning, teaching, or using issues, some content, or where it's not clear. That one, there's nothing. So I can just quickly, hopefully you can see that by checking these, I can quickly interrogate where the sort of concentrations of discussion in the literature is around these issues. And if I'm interested in the articles that have lots to say about using software, then I can select that cell in the table, and down at the bottom it shows me the coded quotations, and I can do the same for teaching. And hopefully you can see that I get a little preview here, but of course, as many of you will know, it's all interactive, so I can double click on that co-occurrence, one of the results in the co-occurrence table, and it will take me there. So one of the things that I wanted to impart in this very brief demonstration, apart from the importance of the problems that can happen when you let tactics drive your strategies, the other thing was to illustrate that there's no right or wrong way of accomplishing an analytic task. You'll often find when you go through our translation process that there are 2 or 3 different ways that you could accomplish your task. And sometimes you may decide to accomplish it in more than one way in order to give you more levers to do later tasks in your project. So I'm just going to finish up very quickly. Sorry, I've been through those. Just to reiterate that in this project, I used coding and assigning documents to groups to fulfill that task. And if you're interested in finding out more about 5-level QDA, then please do visit our website. There's lots of information there, including blogs and links to articles and contact details, etc. You can contact us using that email. And if you're interested in the book, then please do get in touch, because we can offer you a discount on the book. So that's it, Ricardo, if you want to take back control.
Thank you very much, Christina. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes, and I would like to offer the microphone to Sarah Bailey. Sarah Bailey, she has a question, and I would like to ask her to ask it out loud. So let me give you the microphone, Sarah. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Christina. I was just wondering, those key issues that you developed in your memo about documents, were they related to your research questions?
Yes, so they were related to the literature review questions. So let me just go back to, sorry, that's the other project. So you're talking about these ones, yeah? So,
yes, yeah.
Yeah, so the literature review was part of a bigger project. So after the literature review, we went and did some primary data collection with people who were learning software. So we interviewed them and surveyed them for a year after they'd been on one of our courses. So these areas were developed specifically in relation to what we wanted to get out of the literature, but also with a view of thinking about what the larger project was about, because the overall objective of why we did this piece of work was because we wanted to develop online materials which were useful to people. So it was both of those things. Okay,
thank you. I have another question. Can I ask my second question?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you showed, you demonstrated the auto-coding tool. Do you often use it in combination? Like, can you combine phrases or words? Sorry, that's my dog. Can you combine phrases or words to search for things together? Do you find that useful, or can that be confusing?
Yeah, you can. I think Ricardo might be best placed to talk about the specific way that it's working at the moment in version 8, because it's not working in exactly the same way as it was in version 7. Yeah. But yes, you can search for multiple words or phrases. I think, you know, it depends what the purpose of using the auto-coding tool is. I mean, you know, and that's all to do with the methodology and the strategy. So if you're doing a sort of content analysis in which the methodology assumes that the use of words and phrases is indicative of something that you're interested in. So my classic example is I did a piece of work looking at speeches that Tony Blair gave. Yes. And so I was interested in the words and phrases he used, and that was the level that the analysis was pitched at. But, you know, if you're doing something more interpretive and you want to get, you know, underneath what people are actually saying, whether it's a speech or an interview or a visual image or whatever, then the auto-coding tools only get you so far. So I think it's about thinking about the appropriate use of them, and auto-coding I often use in projects, but in some projects I never would, because it wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me see if there is any other questions. We have only 5 minutes and we will have to be very careful with the time. Let me see here. We do not have more questions, at least not any more written questions. So anybody would like to say something? I'm looking at the list of participants. If you have something to say, you may click on the hand icon next to your name in the GoToWebinar control panel. So why don't we do this? Since we don't have more questions, Christina, would you like to say a few words to close the session?
Yes. Well, I don't know.
Just 1 minute, just to say, if anything else you would like to add before we close.
Well, we're one of the reasons that Nick and I have been working on this for the last few years is because we want to enable learners of ATLASti to be able to harness the software for their needs more quickly than we learnt to do. I think I can probably talk for Nick and for many other expert users of ATLASti that we went through a process of trial and error to get to the level of understanding and use of the software that we have. And many of my students and researchers who I come in contact with don't have the luxury of that amount of time, and they need to develop the expertise quickly whilst they're undertaking a particular project. And for many students, whilst they're also learning about qualitative methodology. So we're very keen to talk to other teachers and users of ATLASti to find out what they think about the method. So it's not, it's not just about us saying go and buy a book. It's also about us really wanting to have a dialogue with others about this, and so that we can all learn as a community of practice to enable researchers and students produce as high quality research as possible. So we're really keen to hear from people. So please do let us know what you think.
Okay, thank you very much. There is one more question, but unfortunately we do not have the time to answer it. I would like to ask Catherine to please write down the question and send it to Christina to her email, and her email is right there, contact us. And basically it's about using ATLASti in interpretative analysis. But I suspect that the answer would take longer than a few seconds, the few seconds that we have left. I would like to ask Yvette to say a few words before we close.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and thank you, Nick and Christina, for that great presentation. Just wanted to let everyone know that the next masterclass webinar will be October 12th. You can register for that on the IIQM website, www.iiqm.ualberta.ca, and the presenter will be Jessica Nina Lester, and she'll be talking on practical considerations for doing applied conversation analysis and discourse analysis research.
Thank you very much, Yvette. Thank you very much, Christina and Nick. And thank you, all of you, for coming today. We are now in our, Yvette, is it the 4th or 5th year of this program?
I believe the 4th.
The 4th year, yes. So, and it's been very, very, very nice, a very nice opportunity for people from all over the world to come together and to hear what experienced researchers are doing in terms of qualitative methodology. So your support is always important and appreciated. So we hope to have you here the next time we have these presentations, and we hope to count with your support in the next year and more. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. I will close the session now. And by the way, just go to the IIQM website by maybe Monday, Yvette, and the slides will be there, as well as the link to the video. Thank you, all of you, and goodbye.